Eddie said he couldn't be here today because the Senate Commerce meeting is still going on from this morning. And I don't know if you guys have tuned into that or not, but there's been a lot of testimony over there on from a lot of people that are hurting from the unemployment issues that we're having. And so hopefully we can get that figured out soon for them. So who would be, let's see, Chris Courtwright, could you go through the rules for us, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I don't have those in front of me. Are you referring to the statement the revisers make about the Open Meetings Act? Or I just, maybe John has the script in front of him, but I think from the First Department standpoint, we would envision this working like the meeting the other day. If someone wishes to be recognized, the same kind of protocols that were implemented at the meeting that you held here a couple days ago. I do know, I think the revisers want to read the statement at the outset of every meeting about the Open Meetings Act compliance.
Okay, let's see, would that be Zach?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have the memo here for you.
Okay, thank you very much. You go ahead, please.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This is Zach Friedel with the Office of Reviser of Statutes. Due to health and safety concerns, members of the public are not in attendance at this meeting. The meeting is being conducted by internet communication, allowing members of the public without cost to listen to the meeting through the use of live stream and audio broadcasting on the internet and through teleconference as available. The audio link can be reached by visiting www.ks.legislature.org, selecting the audio video link, then State House Live and Archive. The agenda for this meeting has been posted on the Kansas Legislature website. It was included with the notice of meeting and may be requested from the Office of Reviser of Statute using the Office of Reviser of Statute's official website at ks.reviser.org. Any other documents presented during this meeting will be available on the Legislature's website and from the Office of Reviser of Statutes. Each member of the committee and staff will state their name and title each time the individual begins speaking or voting so that the individual can be readily identified by remote listeners. All participants are required to ensure that microphones, phones, or other electronic devices are muted when the participants are not speaking so that the ability of remote listeners or observers to hear the proceedings is not unnecessarily impeded. Public comment will not be allowed at this meeting. During this committee meeting, the committee will not recess to a closed or executive meeting pursuant to KSA 754319. Each motion, if any, will be clearly stated before the committee votes, and the chairperson will announce the results of the final vote. The chairperson will be permitted to sign any binding documents for the committee. Audio will be available on the Legislature's official website within 30 minutes of adjournment of the meeting for the members of the public to review. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Zach. Appreciate it. And then I guess we'll have Dana take roll if she can do that.
Thank you, Chairman Tarwater. I will read the roll of the members of the committee, followed by the staff, beginning with Chairperson Sean Tarwater.
Here.
Vice Chairperson Ken Corbett.
Just a second.
Here.
Ranking Minority Stan Fraunfelter. Representative Tom Burrows.
Here.
Representative Will Carpenter. Representative Chris Croft. Representative Pam Curtis.
Here.
Representative Ron Highland.
Here.
Representative Don Heineman. Representative Kyle Hoffman.
Here.
Representative Jan Kessinger.
Here.
Representative Marty Long.
Here.
Representative Les Mason.
Here.
Representative Jason Probst.
Here.
Representative Bradley Ralph.
Here.
Representative Luis Ruiz. Representative Luis Ruiz.
Here.
Representative Christy Williams.
Here.
From the Legislative Research Department, Eddie Penner, who's otherwise occupied. John Hess. Chris Courtwright.
Here.
From the Reviser of Statutes Office, Charles Reimer.
Mr. Reimer is also in Senate Commerce.
Thank you. Zach Friedel
Here.
and Dana Rooney here.
Okay, thank you, Dana. It looks like Representative Heineman was able to join us. He was waiting to be let in, I believe, when you were calling roll. So let the record know. Go ahead, Don.
I also see Chris Croft.
Yes, I'm here.
Dana, Representative Fraunfelter has joined on my screen as well.
How about Will Carpenter? Okay, thank you.
Not seeing it. All right, thank you, Dana. We appreciate it. Will was excused for today's meeting. He had a family issue to address today, I believe, so he's been excused. Let's see, so the U.S. Department of Labor sent me an email yesterday that they were not going to be able to testify today, but they will send me some information that will answer some of the questions that we had the other day. I'll get those when I get them. I'll get those out to Dana to circulate to everyone so that they can read that testimony or question and answer, whatever the document is that he'll be sending me. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with Alan Cobb from the Kansas Chamber.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Alan Cobb, President and CEO of the Kansas Chamber. I appreciate now more than ever all the public service that you all are engaged with, trying to solve problems in this very bizarre, unprecedented, unforeseen time. Not exactly a playbook for any of us. I think I was asked to present some information from the Chamber's perspective on relief and recovery. I think I'll be relatively brief to have several questions. Of course, I say that maybe I'll start wandering off into some area, but wanted to focus on priorities for sine die for next session, and also kind of the broad future that are all related to COVID, not necessarily our standard legislative agenda. So first priority for next week would be liability protection for good faith actors that are following government guidelines. This would be both individuals and businesses on personal injury and product liability, that it would not be blanket liability protection for those not acting in good faith or there's clear convincing evidence they're acting willful and wantonly. We're still working on standards and looking at what other states have done, looking at some of the case law in Kansas of what those standards would be of grossly negligent, willful and wanton, et cetera. So that's the first priority. Second would be unemployment insurance fixes, and not the issue. Yes, it is a priority to get the payments issue fixed, but there's a couple things about, and some of this we might be able to do in January, but not have COVID-19 layoffs be part of the experience rating, which then it would increase the unemployment insurance rates. The second is some fixes to the share program. We actually have some members, because of the 08-09 recession, who don't have a negative balance, but they have a negative experience rating. And they're actually kind of in the paradox of they can't have someone work part-time and then get part-time unemployment. They either have to lay them all the way off or not at all. I think that shouldn't be a controversial fix. In conversations with the Department of Labor about that, would oppose changes to workers' comp that have been proposed, which would switch the presumption on workplace injury, that would make it a presumption, which is kind of totally different from the origins of workers' comp, kind of puts it on its head, and I think would create a bad precedent. Have not had a conversation with the Department of Labor about that yet, if there's some middle ground or something there, but what's been proposed we would oppose. I think another thing, and this isn't, I had this in my list as a priority for sine die. This is really, so let me go back to this in a second. The other two would be property tax, both the transparency bill that I believe passed the Senate, and then a bill that's in language being proposed that would allow local governments to waive penalties and interest, which has been done at the state income tax level, hasn't been done for property tax. And also, I know this I know there's only so much, so you can only have so many hours next week, so still have to work through priorities, but possibly changing the sales remittance, allow it to be paid based on sales rather than prepay. I'm going to be real high level this without getting into weeds, but happy to get into more details if you have questions. The other one would be a linked loan deposit program, which would use 60 million of the state idle funds, which I think right now are 4 billion. Obviously, those are going to be going down to allow those to be used for small business loans. I think beyond sine die, things I think for all of you policymakers to consider and be in conversations with the governor. I know she's created the recovery task force with Lyle Butler as the chair. I believe the primary purpose for that is to figure out how to spend that $1 billion that the state gets, which cannot be spent to plug revenue gaps. And I've looked at some other states have had some conversations, and I'll just throw some things out to consider that we all might want to be in conversation with the governor, is rebuild some of the balances on unemployment insurance. Idaho is doing small business loans and grants also for nonprofits. They're also doing a program that provides some rent and mortgage assistance for certain levels of income. And also they've used some of those dollars to purchase PPEs, both for small businesses. And of course, we all know what PPPs are, right? I didn't know what it was a month ago. To purchase those for small businesses and individuals. And another thing I think could be considered is maybe there's some dollars that could be put to the universities for some very specific, and community colleges for some very specific COVID-19 related research and development, whether it's health or maybe economic. And I think that's something that should be considered. For next session, and this is things we'll work out language over the summer and fall with many of you, making permanent many of the changes that the governor made with executive orders, which have been good, like some of the flexibility in occupational licensing, independent practice for nurse practitioners, expanding telemedicine, allowing notaries and witnesses to act via audio video technology. And some of the, also on the occupational licensing issue is allowing more virtual continuing ed. I think those are all good things, should not be controversial. I think obviously we're all going to have to review the Emergency Management Act and the processes and authorities and the separation of powers. None of us, when that was written, I don't think it was written in 1918, so I don't think it was written with the aspect of having a pandemic, but it has been, if anybody, if you've looked into the statutes and the process, it is a bit of a Rubik's Cube, and I think I finally now understand it. And I don't think it's ideal either whether you're in the administration or for you in the legislature. And I think we need to take a serious look at local government consolidation. And I'm not talking about cities and counties. I'm talking about all those smaller units of government. Kansas has 3,800 units of local government. Utah, which is virtually the same size, but in geography and population, has 600. That's certainly some inefficiency and probably not providing some of the services that can be done if it's more efficient and more consolidated. Also probably should take a hard look at a real rainy day fund. It's not going to be easy with the depleted revenue, but have a real one. And then also go back and look at the A&M recommendations on budget reform. No matter what happens, the revenue is going to be down a lot, but the government still needs to provide essential products, or not products, but services to the citizens. And there's going to be fewer dollars to do that. So how can we as a state provide those services more effectively, more efficiently, without necessarily cutting them, or taking a hard look at maybe there's some things the state's doing that they shouldn't be doing. And then in the broad-based future, clearly there's going to be some reshoring on manufacturing. Kansas is one of the states with a larger percent of its GDP in manufacturing than most states. We have a great manufacturing infrastructure, not just aviation, but both from workforce and suppliers. And of course, that reshoring is going to be partly because of national security issues and the challenge that China prevents, but also just the disruption of the supply chain. And so what do we need to do, which I don't know, that we can encourage as much of that reshoring to happen here. I believe seven of the top 10 pharmaceutical feedstocks are from China. That clearly is a problem. And we have a pretty good bioscience infrastructure too. Are there things the state can do? And that could certainly be an area where the universities chime in to get more of the pharmaceutical feedstocks being made in Kansas. Clearly, there's going to be an opportunity now for more remote work as people all over the world have figured out how to be productive, just like we are right now. That could be a good thing for rural Kansas or even urban Kansas. You don't need to live in Chicago to be working for a Chicago bank or an engineering firm. And then also, I think, as I've talked to some folks at the universities and colleges, that taking a hard look at maybe having the universities and colleges focus more on business and economic issues. And hey, I'm a liberal arts guy. I'm not saying dump the humanities by any means, but I think they can be a key driver in how we grow the economy. We were one of the last states to recover from 08-09 for a lot of reasons. And I think we should all take a hard look at how do we avoid that this time. I will say that clearly the states that have a big chunk of travel and tourism as their economy, which we don't. I'm looking at all these great pictures from Representative Hyman and Probst. There's a lot of beautiful things to see in Kansas, but that's not what drives our economy. And there's a whole lot of states that are going to really struggle, from the New England states, obviously Florida, Nevada, Alaska, Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota even. And so I think we have some opportunities to move a little faster than we did in 08-09. Happy to answer any questions, take any suggestions, any things you think the chamber or the business community should be looking at, could be looking at. Any of your thoughts, and obviously any of you can talk to me privately outside of if this is not the most efficient way to communicate. But I appreciate everybody being here, and thank you for the time.
Thank you, Alan, for your testimony today and for your information. I have a few questions, but it looks like Christy Williams is on the board, so we'll start with her.
Thank you, Chairman. This is Representative Christy Williams. And Alan, thank you for giving us an idea of some of the priorities from Kansas Chamber and the businesses. So you mentioned one about sales tax remittance. With that, did you look at possibly liquor tax remittance, also the license fees for liquor licenses that are thousands of dollars when they weren't able to be open or to sell the product, and also for other types of license fees for other professionals that weren't able to practice, whether it was the salon? Was there a recommendation to prorate it, or to provide refunds, or to change that long term so they're paying, you mentioned paying sales tax, not prepaying it? Perhaps maybe we need to look at that a little broader, and didn't know if you guys had discussed that.
Absolutely, all of those things. I think on the occupational licensing fees, I believe that is covered in EO 2019, which I mentioned. I think a priority for next year would be to put those in statutes. I just want to be practical on what all of that can be done in one day next week. Liquor taxes, frankly, I have less of a knowledge of that. And Scott Schneider, I think, is going to speak. He probably knows. Yes, and if they're paid in the future, no, let's allow those to be paid in the past. We have some retailers that like prepaying. I don't know why, but let's give those folks some options. So to your occupational licensing, I believe it's covered in 2019, but that would certainly be. And we have I don't know if it was emailed, but a full 4 or 5 page relief and recovery plan in the broad sense. And I didn't cover every single thing today, but certainly we'll take a look at the alcohol tax. That makes a lot of sense, both for restaurants and for retailers.
Yeah, I just think it'd be a great move if we're able to incorporate that in any type of bill that addresses the emergency management, that addresses the COVID-19 pandemic. Then I think that would be one high on the priority list, because those are businesses that aren't receiving income, or only a small portion of their normal income, and therefore because they were mandated to close, or because they couldn't have a certain product sold, or a maximum number of individuals inside or carry out. I just don't think that they should be expected to pay their entire licensure fees, whether it's a professional that cuts hair, or it's somebody in a restaurant. So I hope we will look at that. Thank you.
Well, that brings up a good point that I think something should be looked at over the summer and fall. Are there some other things that should automatically trigger when there's an emergency declaration? And that can get a little complicated to do delay sales tax when it's a flood, maybe delay sales tax for those counties that are within the flood or tornado or fire. So I think those things should be looked at. I do want to mention something else, just on behalf of the chamber, we've had a lot of our members that have repurposed some of their manufacturing. I know BG Products in El Dorado and Wichita, which they make a lot of chemicals for the auto industry, is making a lot of hand sanitizer. Fuller Brush in Great Bend, the famous Fuller Brush company, they're making about as much hand sanitizer. They were already making hand sanitizer, but they're making about as much in a day as like Procter & Gamble is in a week. And they've been a huge provider of hand sanitizer all over the state. I know a lot of breweries and distilleries have shifted. The aviation companies in Wichita, among others, are making PPEs and masks and shields. Textron has sewing equipment for plane interiors and begun to shift those to make masks. Obviously, we have plastic manufacturers in Kansas that are beginning and have made shields. We even have a manufacturer in Hayes that has reshifted to making respirators. So I think Kansans have responded very well. I think all of you and the governor have responded well, businesses. And I have a few things to pick with some of the crazy stuff happening at the local government level, like Lynn County with 5 cases requiring everybody to track anybody coming in and out of every business and home. But that's being litigated, so a court will figure that out. But I wanted to bring those up too. But thank you for those questions, Representative Williams.
Any follow-up, Representative Williams?
No, thank you.
All right. Yeah, I tend to agree with all that. I think that, if the committee would remember, one of the earlier items that we looked at were all the regulations that we have and some of them that we need to look at. We never really got that far this year. But I think we've seen at least some regulations that the governor's willing to relax in some of these executive orders, and those are things that we might be able to make permanent when we come back next year, if we come back next year. So,
and I'd also add, talking to Secretary Toland, and I'm sure this has happened in other places, state government. This has kind of forced everybody, whether you're private sector, public sector, to look at what you're doing and can you do it more efficiently. And I know he's been able to shift some. It wasn't a regulation; it was just like an internal process that took 30 days and now takes 5. So some things are happening naturally, and if they could do that without a regulation, maybe that could be happening with regulatory relief too.
All right. Looks like Representative Corbett has a question for you.
Yeah, Representative Corbett, the question I have for you is I've had tons of calls from businesses who are not able to open. They're non-essential. They're still not open, but they're still responsible to pay the property tax, that commercial property tax, when they're not allowed to be a commercial operation. Do you foresee anything down the road that would kind of make that a little more fair? Because property tax for commercial businesses are pretty stiff, just for the time that they were affected.
I think obviously the waiving penalties and interest is a small part, which I think you'll probably deal with next week. But I think that's another good point to add in discussion about the Emergency Management Act. Once it's triggered, and if a stay-at-home order is triggered, what is the obligation of that individual or business? I mean, it is a balancing act because we still expect local governments, who are the primary recipients of property tax, to provide services. And so I think that's a worthy discussion. And I've heard that a lot too, Representative Corbett. And I think that should be part of the discussion over the summer and fall about all of these things that we should take a harder look at in January, next time we have a similar situation.
Any follow-up?
Thank you.
Okay.
No, but I appreciate that. As you drive through your communities, you can see all the buildings that have been shut down. And that's a lot of property tax that's been paid in for not much received on the business end.
Okay, so Alan, can you tell me, you local governments, and some of them are more strict than others. Johnson County is one of those. They recently held a task force that I thought was going way too far. They ended up not pulling the trigger because the governor extended her stay-at-home order. But they had one, they were talking about opening businesses, and they had one person on the panel that owned business out of many people and politicians and yes people, if you ask me, that the conclusion was foregone, it was there, and they worked towards what they wanted to do, in my opinion. have any of these local governments reached out to the Kansas Chamber? And for that matter, did the governor reach out to the Kansas Chamber to get ideas and to find out what the businesses had in line for their own best practices? Did anyone reach out to the chamber for any of that?
Yeah, the governor is their staff, and they've done a great job of reaching out to us. And we've gotten from our industry. Our industry sectors. We're the manufacturing council for Kansas. We're the retailers council, and we're also the U.S. Chamber rep. So we were able to have great resources from national entities that had best practices, and I believe they incorporated those in their guidelines. Have not had as much input, or we've reached out to some counties. I guess, again, I'm not arguing for consolidation of counties, but when you have 105 counties, there's not enough hours in the day, but have not had as many conversations with the counties. I would say that's something else that needs to be looked at, is you have local health directors who are not necessarily accountable to the elected, that their only accountability is to be hired or fired. And I think that needs to be looked at. There's plenty of people in the state that may not like what the governor did, but she's elected. And you have local health department leaders who are not elected, and being able to make unilateral decisions. I think that's a problem that needs to be looked at. Everything else we're talking about is a balance of economics and health, and also authority here. But I think that needs to be seriously reviewed, allowing one person to keep a county shut down.
Couldn't agree with you more. Any further questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Cobb, for your testimony.
Thank you.
Let's move on to Scott Schneider next with the Restaurant Association. And I believe you guys all have, you were at least emailed the testimony in advance. I think he's got 2 or 3 items on that. If anybody didn't receive that, would you reach out to Dana and have her send it to you, just so you can have it? Okay, Scott, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope everybody can hear me. I did present the similar testimony to the Senate Commerce a few minutes ago, but I started what they had a pretty serious and emotional conversation going with this idea I heard last night at church while I was thinking about the singer Meatloaf, that we're either going to come out of this as a hunk, a chunk, or a drunk. And I thought to myself, 2 out of 3 is not bad. So anyhow, the Restaurant and Hospitality Association, we don't think we've ever experienced anything close to this level of government intrusion into our business model than we have in the last couple months. We understand the need to stand down our businesses because of the unknowns that were out there, but it came at a pretty steep price to many big businesses who have quite a few chains, many small businesses that's their entire life earnings. Since March 1, we've lost $325 million of sales, which is stunning. We've laid off 64,000 employees, laid off or furloughed them. And then 38% of restaurants have either closed permanently or temporarily. We're a little different in the sense that we might not, when I say we, I think there's many restaurants, if we don't do something now, might not make it till January. The surveys that we've said, and I appreciate Alan Cobb pitching in with the state chamber to stand up one for Kansas, to mirror both Oklahoma and some of the national data that we've been looking at, say that 60% of the rest of the customers aren't ready to go back to a restaurant. Well, when you have 20 days of cash reserves, if you're a small restaurant, we're now into this thing a month and a half, maybe a little more. You can do the math to see if you've got to let this thing run another, month, it's going to create a strain that you have to then justify. Can I risk another dollar, or should I just fold up shop? So we're actually asking the Senate today, and we're asking the House. I know you guys want to come back for one day, but these guys might not come back and have an option to solve something in January if we don't address a few of these things. I will skip kind of the background on what was helpful through this process. Alan and I talk probably every day through this thing, trying to figure out how in the world do we get information into the decision makers' hands. And then I will, over a beer, talk about what was hurtful. But I think spending time right now on what's possible, what do we need from the legislature in this short amount of time, is probably going to be the most productive. Yesterday, Senate tax dealt with an issue that Alan mentioned, the penalties and interest on property tax. That creates at least some certainty in a business owner's mind of what are their obligations going to be. And so that's the first thing that's really important. The second thing is the prepaid sales tax. What happens if we're in this situation this fall again, and something unspeakable happens and we start to turn down the economy again? Are we going to again have to prepay our sales tax? It's almost unthinkable. We were actually giving folks advice: if you don't have the money, don't pay your tax. Well, that's horrible advice to have to give, but the alternative is to not have any money to feed your family. So we've been in that kind of dire straits as far as a pretty large sector of the economy. So that sales tax piece would be nice. The other thing that took us more time than we really wanted, but allowing the growlers and mixed drinks to be sold inside a restaurant, it might seem simple to those on the outside, but if you can double the amount of a ticket that you sell just by serving a margarita or a mixed drink or a growler instantly, that's a simple policy that's created no public health hazard that we could solve now. So as people are trying to stand back up their restaurants, and carry out and delivery are a thing that's going to never go away, now that people have kind of this expectation that it's available, it is a very valuable thing to all kinds of folks who either don't want to be in public or don't have the time and can plan for delivery. So that's something that is a tangible thing, that's a government policy that doesn't cost us as a state anything. It actually allows more freedom in that marketplace. The other thing is the legal liability, and I think the judiciary is going to work on that. As a restaurateur, I was asked by a Senate Democrat in committee, does this bring confidence to the public? And I responded, it's not about confidence in the public, this side of it, making sure that we understand what the legal liability is in a community disease, a community-wide disease that we don't really know how it's driven, how it's passed. We know that staying away from each other seems to maybe help a little bit, but to create some certainty within that risk profile for small businesses, even in the near term, would be a very valuable thing and give folks confidence. I think Alan mentioned kind of the negligence side of things. I don't think you can go too far. We talked about it with some members in the law firm, that if you took it to the extreme and created total immunity, I think it's going to fail a court test. Folks in a prison, for example, folks in a nursing home who can't be any other place but that, I think they should be able to bring a case and actually have some remedies if that's the facts. But the external folks that are public facing, it would at least create some level of certainty. The linked deposit loan program, I'm going to testify in the morning, I think is a very valuable tool. We've had, as an industry, some very mixed reviews on the PPP program. The intent was to bring your people back to work. Well, what happens when you can't serve bar? What happens when the waitress can't serve anybody? Dining's closed. How do you, in your mind, think, okay, I'm going to take this loan, I'm going to try to hire people back, but I don't have anything for them to do because the government's told me to stand down. So that loan has its place, and I hope people have been able to find some value in it, but we haven't found as much value in it as others. And the linked deposit loan program is a longer term solution that might create some certainty to those who need some additional access to capital. So that's one thing. And then the final thing is Kansas Department of Labor has proposed a rule creating a presumption that if you got COVID-19, it happened at the workplace. We think wrong time probably to even have this conversation, but it's definitely the wrong approach, and it would turn our workers' comp, some of our self-insured workers' comp funds, which we have one, on their head. And just changing that in and of itself is just not what we need right now. But I will stop with that and answer any questions if anybody has any.
We do have a few for you. Thank you very much for your testimony. Let's start with Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Hoffman, Kyle Hoffman. Scott, thanks for coming. I was curious on the sales tax. Do you have an idea of the percentage of businesses that haven't paid yet?
No, we really don't. We've been playing whack-a-mole every day, trying to figure out which county is going to do what to us, who has the authority at the government level to make the next step. And we haven't been able to aggregate on the back end or even survey our members on kind of that exposure that might be out there.
Okay. All right. That would probably be something that would, if you are able to get that, it'd probably be helpful when we go into that debate with, then that's tax, but still when we go into that debate, it'd probably be helpful to know that. Since it was supposed to be due last Monday.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ron Highland here. I read your letter that you sent out, your testimony, and one of the areas, when you read back in history and see the 2018 and 2019 epidemic, the confidence for people to go out and about in public and to restaurants and so forth, some of the writings are saying that lasted for up to 10 years. What is it you think we can do to help you to reinstill the confidence in the folks, or do you have ideas in that area? The second question then is your last paragraph. You talked about the demand for more balanced data, and I think this goes along with the confidence levels. So would you expound on that just a little bit? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We think as restaurateurs, we have a commitment to our customers to create confidence. So it is a bit ironic that we're one of the few licensed entities in the state for cleanliness. That's what the license is for, to make sure that we run safe restaurants and adopt scientific protocols so there's not a foodborne illness. So for us to be, kind of on the front lines of being turned down, we're questioning, why do we have a license? But regardless, we're not going to win that fight right now. We think it's worth a debate. We think that we have to provide a clean place for people to come and know that they're going to enjoy the meal and leave still healthy, whether that's hand sanitizer, PPEs, washing down the table after every visit, single-use menus. We put a task force together, quite honestly, to deal with what does phase one look like. We made recommendations to the governor on how we thought the 10-person plus 6-foot rule would apply. We encouraged her to allow for physical barriers, which they did adopt, just to create some density, but maintain the safety. So if people aren't confident in their health, they're not going to come spend a buck with us. So it's just something we can't run away from. But on the public side of things, I put in there kind of demand better data, because I think right now we are in a panic in just the data that's being driven out there. we don't really talk about who's recovered. I do some work with some hospitals, and really this is some information from them. They said, well, you know, we probably need to know that, you know, who's been admitted, who's been allowed to leave, and that data is actually easily achievable. So kind of having a more balanced message to where we're not running around our communities fearful, I think is an important thing that Kansans would appreciate.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Representative Highland, did you have a follow-up to that?
I just wanted to state that I do agree with that. And I think as a legislature, we need to demand that data be made available to the entire public so that we can instill some new confidence as we move forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And to follow that up a little bit, I know I have a standing call every night with some people from the county and some people and some other fellow representatives in Johnson County. And I know that Johnson County is working, or at least some of the commissioners are working towards acquiring a test that would test most Johnson Countyans to see if they've had it. I think they're seeing in some of these other states that have huge amounts of cases that, you know, for every one case, there's 3 or 4 that they didn't even know about that had no symptoms. And so I think if we could use some of the state dollars that we got from the federal government to do the same similar testing around the state, I think we'd find out that a lot more people had this than we realized. And that in and of itself should make the consumer feel a little more comfortable with going out, because I mean, my mother, she's 85 years old and she hasn't, oh, she's going to kill me now. Well,
We won't tell anybody.
Sorry, Mom. But she stopped watching the news because all day, every day, all it was how bad this thing was. And it was like watching the movie Outbreak, except for no one was really dying, or not hardly anybody was anyway. And so with that kind of press, it's no wonder nobody wants to go out. But I think as we get the better data and the new data and find out that there are a large amount of people that had it and never presented symptoms, and there's a large amount of people that have recovered and drive down that overall death rate percentage, I think we'll get people out. And you know, like you were saying, so Scott, the restaurants in Johnson County are just now starting to open up, but they've opened a week earlier in the other parts of the restaurant or the other parts of the state. What are they seeing as far as consumer confidence and coming out and feeling safe? Are people coming back in? Do they have waits on Friday and Saturday night, or?
Well, we haven't experienced any waits. You know, most of it's anecdotal right now. Folks, you think about standing up your food line. If you got rid of it, trying to not create waste, how do you then go start standing up your distribution system again? So there's some stresses in the marketplace. I can tell you, my wife and I have tried to go out to eat, and 2 days ago we were the 3rd person to walk into Iron Rail, and that was 1:30. So, or the 3rd table. So there's been some mixed results. I was in a bar in Walt's Bar and Grill in Wichita the other night, out to dinner. They've had to remove half their tables to create kind of the 6-foot space. Well, can you make any money by having half of your space basically empty? That's going to be a whole new challenge that we have to go figure out. Density's always been an important thing. Your price per square foot, and what you can make on that. And time will tell. We've had some really smart folks in the fast food side. Freddy's, you know, is headquartered in Wichita. They've reorganized stores multiple times trying to figure out, okay, what is the density that we need to have in order to justify opening our doors. But as far as the confidence, it's going to come slowly, but as people reemerge and kids start playing together and we start doing things together, it'll get there. But can these businesses survive until it does? That's going to be the big question.
Representative Ralph.
I've got a question for Mr. Schneider and Brad Ralph, District 119, Dodge City, and got a question for Mr. Schneider. But just before moving to that particular question, just maybe as a piece of balance for this particular community, or a balance for folks that are listening in out there, residing in a community that at the moment exists with some of the highest numbers in this state, knowing people who have actually contracted this particular virus, who have experienced it, lived through it, had family members live through it, knowing people who have dealt with deaths that have occurred, and in a community our size, those deaths aren't just someone in the community, that's somebody that you're going to know. And also residing within a community that's why, while they deal with those things, are not panicking and are not in some sense of distress that's unusual or out of character. I just wanted to make the comment that I think our community, along with many other communities, is dealing with this in a very reasonable and level fashion, while they experience one of the largest outbreaks and experiences with this that anybody else in the state is dealing with. So just for people to keep in mind that people are not running around jumping up on chairs, even when they're in the midst of this in some very trying times. And just want to give a shout out to those folks that are dealing with it. They're dealing with it in a reasonable fashion, knowing that we're going to come out on this on the other side. But aside from my moment of editorial there, Mr. Schneider, also serving on the Judiciary Committee, have you or your organizations have had much involvement in regard to the proposed legislation dealing with the potential immunities or affirmative defense or whatever? I'm just curious, because we had quite a bit of testimony, but I know there's a lot of other people out there that might want some input on that, or have some input on some of the proposals. I just didn't know, while I had you here, if you had something to offer or add there.
Yeah, we've looked at it. We've talked a lot with the state chamber and Alan and Eric on, kind of how we fit within that and what that means to us. So we're comfortable with them taking the lead on that one, as we try to kind of focus on these other things that are really specific to our industry. But we think it's going to be helpful, and we think it's needed. We think it's needed both at the state level and especially at the national level, where the whole that paradigm's different than even any kind of state litigation, and maybe even more important. But yeah, we've looked at it. We're partners in that, and we'd support that state chamber's position on that.
Okay, I just wanted to give you the opportunity while I had you here for a moment. Appreciate your time today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Representative Christy Williams, and I wanted to comment really quickly on and then ask a question. On the restaurants, that's one of the things that my husband does, and the restaurants are really struggling with managing the people coming in now, 50% capacity in Sedgwick County, and then the carry out. Because if you think about a redesign, you are redesigning your business, and you're trying to redesign it to survive on, let's say, 50%, 60% of what you normally might have been able to do inside your restaurant. So it's very, very difficult. If anybody tried to get food on Mother's Day and they did a call out order or carry out order, I mean, there are horror stories, and Cinco de Mayo was pretty tough, but at least they get the opportunity to have sales. And so that's the good news, is that all the restaurants are trying to figure out, how do we move forward and keep, because carry out, as we're all talking about, will stay. So my question for Scott is, I know that the National Chamber of Commerce came out and said that they're estimating maybe 40% of businesses, I think small businesses, but I'm not 100% sure, may not make it. And if I look around the Wichita area, I can see it. I mean, I can just see store after store, and I don't know how they can, have enough capital come back. So bringing that down to restaurants here in Kansas, knowing that they produce over $5 billion of sales And if you take that down to sales tax and liquor tax and licenses, I mean, they are dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into the state's coffers. What are you estimating? Something like 40% or hopefully less, or have you even gone that far?
Well, thank you for the question. The national survey data that we've got from the National Restaurant Association says that 38% have closed temporarily at some point during this process so far. I think it's almost unknown to know who's going to stay closed permanently, as people's cash positions are very different. You know, we've got a pretty robust bankruptcy practice at our law firm, and I was talking to one of their bankruptcy attorneys, and because, well, you need to take a loan out right now to improve your cash position if you're going to declare bankruptcy. So it's almost unknowable. People are going to make decisions based on what they view as real. But, you know, the restaurant industry in Kansas has produced $5.5 billion of sales in the state. So what's the tax implication if 40% of that goes away just on the sales side of it? You know, it's a pretty significant function. Will it go away forever? I don't know that, but will it impact our members' lives today? I think absolutely it is.
And I would just add that on the capital investment that they'll need to make into their restaurants or bars to make them sustainable, it's going to be significant, because you have to rework, you know, it's not just moving your tables, but it's finding a way to actually operate outside, take the carry out, keep people separated. It's revamping your entire business. So hopefully there'll be some types of loan programs or available to these restaurants so that they can continue working in Kansas, and Kansas can continue to eat out. Thank you.
Well, that's one more thing. Delivery is going to change our entire business model. People know and have some more comfort with the safety of delivery, the carry out of alcohol. Tuck Duncan just texted me, said, "Hey, Oklahoma just passed the delivery of alcohol and carry out of alcohol." So this moment is not going to go away. How we do business, the food and alcohol industry is going to be more mobile, and I think we have to figure out what that means to us, because it is important. It might seem insignificant to everybody else, but if that's how you're making your buck right now, there is nothing more important. So anyway, thanks for having me, guys.
Okay, so we've got 3 more questions for you, and then we got to move on. So let's go with Representative Hoffman, Corbett, and Probst. Hoffman first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kyle Hoffman. Scott, thanks again for being here, and sorry to come back again for a second time. You mentioned, you know, the businesses, the restaurants especially, are having to look at, you know, maybe only half of their tables being available, and then the confidence of people coming in. You know, we're getting close to the 18th, and the governor made it clear yesterday in the at the Finance Council that she wouldn't give an answer whether or not she's going to allow us to move into phase 2. As we come back on the legislature, is there something more that we could do besides what you've already talked about that we could do to maybe move the reopening quicker to get businesses, or get the restaurants the ability for them to maybe make it easier?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I don't know that quicker is necessarily our stress. I think understanding what the rules are and who gets to make the rules as we move forward might be a bigger concern. As you talk about or think about the emergency order, that matters. If everybody pays attention when a county has a county commission meeting, because they're not sure if they're going to close their business or change their business model or move this type of delivery to that, or and so how do you deal with that on a statewide basis when you do have counties, you know, like Ford and Seward and others that have real issues? So what are the rules, and how are we going to keep democratically elected people in a position so democracy doesn't get thin? And that's probably the thing. If you were to do anything, you need to think about that. But the timing of it, people are still trying to get product. You know, Cisco and US Foods tried to get rid of their whole food line because it's going to perish. Well, now they've got to go restart it, and it's not simple to start up a restaurant from nothing. So the timing of it, we think's probably as good as it needs to be. Johnson County is a little different, but the big structure of it, and I don't think you're going to fix it next week. I think it's going to have to get fixed over a big conversation over time. So
yeah, and you're probably right. My frustration is that we're talking to some of the restaurants in my areas. They haven't opened to inside people yet because, just like you said, they're concerned about being able to have the food available, turning on their air conditioning even. You know, those are expenses that they've been able to cut back on. And if they do that, they get started thinking that they're going to start doing that, going to maybe have bigger crowds come the 18th, and then, you know, all the rules are changed. Then, you know, right before, then it's hard for them to plan. And so I think restaurants will do the right thing. The owners will do the right thing. Business owners will do the right thing. And I think we need to be able to give them some certainty for the future that this is the way it's going to be. Plan on it this date or whatever, and quit having these soft dates that, oh, well, yeah, we might change here, we might not, depending on what's happening. And this one size fits all for the whole state. So
yeah, we walked into Fuzzy's the other night and they're out of food.
Yeah.
Never have I seen a pretty robust operation like that just be out of food. Well, I don't blame them for being out of food. That's the risk they're taking by carrying excess product. So people are gonna lean on the side of less rather than more right now, and I think we have to appreciate, you know, that business decision. But having some certainty and knowing where the market's going, regardless whether it's a restaurant or a small business or anything, is the basic, you know, risk reward deal. Without a stable government, we're all not going to move as forward as fast.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Looks like somebody fell off there. So Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Scott. I want to make a comment before I ask my question, but I know there's a lot of frustration about having certainty on when we move forward in the phases, but I feel it's important to point out that both the White House and I believe the Kansas Chamber and their guidelines on health metrics, that's a very fluid number that's based on the behavior of 3 million people in this state and what happens with them. So I think there might be a desire to establish a hard deadline on when we move to one phase to another. But I think in reality, we have to adapt that we have no control over the behavior of that many people and the spread of a virus. My question is related to the immunity issue and kind of clarifying the liability. And I guess help me understand why our current legal framework won't address that. Even though COVID-19 might be new, the concept of liability is not, and the concept of wanton disregard or negligence is not. So in my mind, it seems like there's probably a mechanism to address liability, even though we're dealing with something new in the current legal framework.
Well, and I appreciate the question and your observation. First, I don't want to be taken that we are not sympathetic to the stops and the starts and the stress that's gone on to get here. Nobody wants to be in this position, so we're sure not casting any blame. So I want to make sure that everyone understands that. Regarding the liability issue, because we're here, and because we don't know exactly how this disease moves, how it affects people yet. We think generally that the safest thing to do to make sure people can want to open their business back up or want to participate in a business enterprise is to create some type of temporary liability or immunity from liability or some type of protection. Do I think over time this will all even out? Yeah, I do. We don't typically sue people if you catch the flu because it's almost unprovable. We don't typically sue folks for foodborne illness, but we still do, even though that's generally unprovable also. The facts and all those things are so difficult to prove. But in this time where the government has created an executive emergency order and multiple executive orders and forced different types of behavior, we think it's appropriate to give some leeway that allows people to have a little confidence on the business side. It's not public confidence that we're trying to get after. It's investment confidence that hey, you're going to be protected from this. We don't even know enough how to litigate it. Let's go learn more for the time being. So that's why we're supporting that. That's why we think it's important.
May I ask a follow-up? So are you looking for something along the lines of, or would you support something along the lines of if the industry established guidelines that were part of the governor's, original plan, if they followed that, then there creates an immunity, but then the proof falls on the claimant to say that the business didn't follow these guidelines, and then that creates a level of immunity. I'm trying to get a better understanding of what that conversation is about.
Yes, that's the general idea. We don't want to reward bad actors. We don't want to reward people that I mentioned nursing home and prison. If you can't get out of one of these places and contract the disease and you can prove somebody didn't follow the appropriate procedures, I don't think you can bar a claim, or you should bar a claim. Kansas has the Tort Claims Act, so prisoners are kind of in a unique situation. So the state's protected more than a business. But generally, we don't want to protect bad actors who aren't following best practices in the CDC type guidelines. So that's the general idea. Making sure we understand what the rules of this thing are moving forward will help create some additional investment, we think, take some additional risk. So
thank you. That's helpful.
Scott, thanks so much for your testimony today. A lot of really good information. So we're gonna move on now to Dan Murray / Connor McGregor / Conan O'Brien, who seems to be standing in the front yard of the Capitol building.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, for allowing me the opportunity to present today on behalf of NFIB Kansas. I want to wish Representative Brownfelter a happy 69th birthday. He doesn't look a day over 80. Seriously, we do appreciate this opportunity. I know these are trying times, and appreciate the ability to meet remotely and provide some information that hopefully you'll find valuable. First, I'll kind of paint a picture and then talk about some things that have been talked about and just give our NFIB twist. And then end with maybe some recommendations that you could take up in the near term, and certainly as you come back in 2021. The impact from this pandemic, including government stay-at-home orders and mandated non-essential business closures, has had a devastating impact on the small business economy, as you all know. Owners are starting to benefit from the PPP program, the EIDL small business loans, as they try to reopen and keep their employees on staff. Yet we have seen some challenges in implementing those PPP loans because of the inflexibility in that, namely that 75% must be used for payroll. We know that rent and utilities and other costs certainly take up more than 25% of the business operation. So finding some flexibility moving forward there. Scott, Mr. Schneider referenced this, that an effort led by the Kansas Bankers Association. I know the credit unions are also participating on a linked deposit lending program that would use some idle state funds to allow for very low interest loans for small businesses up to $250,000. The Senate FI&I committee will take a look at that tomorrow. We think that has some good promise at the state level to provide some capital here in the short term that hopefully can be put to use to help keep doors open and folks on the payroll. NFIB conducts a monthly Optimism Index survey. I think many of you on this committee have heard me reference this before, but I just would like, it came out yesterday, I believe, so just want to touch on a couple high-level points, and none of these will be shocking, but small business optimism took another dive in April, falling 5.5 points to 90.9. Owners are expressing certainty that the economy will weaken in the near term, but fortunately in this survey, they did say, the respondents did say they expect the economy to bounce back in the next 6 months. So small business owners are small business owners because they're optimistic in nature, but certainly we've taken a hit here in this index in the last couple months. Real sales expectations in the next 6 months declined 30 points to a net negative 42%. That's the lowest reading in this survey's 46-year history. The second lowest reading was a net negative 24% in April of 1980. So we're at historically low expectations for real sales here in the next few weeks to months. Some other key findings from our April Optimism Index: earnings trends declined 14 points to a net negative 20%. Among owners reporting weaker profits, 39% blamed weak sales, as you might expect. Additionally, the percent of owners thinking it's a good time to expand lost 10 points, falling to 3%, its lowest level since March 2010. Obviously not good news, and small business owners are feeling the effects of this pandemic. As reported in our most recent NFIB monthly jobs report, job creation plans fell 8 points to a net 1%, the lowest level since December 2012. 3 times as many owners reduced employment as reported in increase in their workforce. 47% reported hiring or trying to hire, but 41% reported few or no qualified applicants. And many of you remember, I think in February, we testified about workforce needs in Kansas, that workforce was the #1 priority for small business owners. The ability to find qualified workers was at a all-time high or low, depending on how you look at it. Could not find workers, and we expressed, if not official support, certainly some support for the House Leadership Plan, the Promise Act, that would allow for some community college, free community college tuition for certain trades that could help the Kansas economy, that responding to the Kansas economy's needs. Now, of course, we have a glut of employment availability with near all-time highs in unemployment. Anyway, as you can see, these numbers and the economic outlook for small business owners is uncertain and bleak, as you heard from Mr. Schneider, whose members, many of whom are our members, and those retailers, and some that have been considered not essential. So we've got some challenges that lie ahead. Part of our response, I think, again, is looking at some of these unique programs like the linked deposit program. You're going to hear more about that if you haven't already. A hearing on that will be held again, as I said, tomorrow morning, and NFIB will stand with the restaurants and the chamber and others to testify in support of that program. Yesterday, I submitted written testimony to the Judiciary Committee in support of the Kansas Chamber's liability protection bill, and wanted to go ahead and reference that to those on this committee that don't serve on the Judiciary Committee. I appreciate the Kansas Chamber taking the lead on that effort. we appreciate their efforts and think it's a vital, important thing, as Scott pointed out, to give businesses the confidence to get back to work, to reinvest, to rehire. The fear of liability related to COVID claims is really high among small business owners, and small businesses are the least able to respond to litigation. They don't have the resources to hire attorneys. They don't have the resources to go to fight litigation that's outstanding. We released a survey last week that showed nearly 70% of small business owners are concerned about liability claims increases, while only 6% are not concerned about that. So we developed, and it's in my testimony, 4 principles that we think the legislature should consider, and certainly we think the Congress should consider as well. And I'll briefly go through those. One related to the workers' compensation system, and I think it was my comments were maybe misunderstood yesterday in the Judiciary Committee, so I want to make it clear. We want to ensure that workers who feel that they suffered an injury of any type pursue their claim through the workers' compensation system and not through civil litigation. We have the workers' compensation system for a reason. That said, as Mr. Schneider pointed out, we don't think that COVID-19 or the common flu or any other easily communicable disease ought to be eligible for workers' compensation. So to the extent that the legislature can look at and enact legislation preventing outside of work comp lawsuits for employees against employers, we would certainly welcome that. Secondly, businesses should be protected from liability to customers and other third parties unless those customers or third parties prove businesses knowingly failed to develop and implement a reasonable plan for reducing the risk of exposure. This is in line, of course, with what the Kansas Chamber bill and proposal does, and we support those measures included. And then third, permitted lawsuits should be limited to persons who experience a serious physical injury due to COVID, resulting in hospitalization. So if we are going to allow lawsuits, those should be limited only to those that are the most extreme. And I think maybe Mr. Schneider referenced the nursing home cases as maybe an example. And then finally, fines should be imposed on unscrupulous trial attorneys bringing frivolous COVID-19 related lawsuits. As I previously mentioned, small business owners fear about lawsuits, maybe not because they think they'll lose in the ultimate end, but because of the costs associated with litigation. It just costs a lot of money to hire attorneys, as we know with Mr. Ralph on the committee. So, and then so with that, I'll close kind of on those items, and then turn your attention to, we've created some best practices. I've shared this with the chairman. I'll run through just very briefly. You have them in front of you, but some of these the state has implemented, and we applaud the governor and the administration and the legislature for doing that. But maybe there are some other things for this committee to consider. Maybe not yet at Sine Die. You've got a very tight schedule and a lot of work on your plate, but potentially moving forward in the summer or the fall and next session. The first is a sales tax reprieve. Basically, as what the previous 2 folks spoke about, Alan and Scott, the prepayment of sales tax is a challenge if you're not collecting sales tax. A payroll tax holiday, tax deadline extension, we've done that. Waive tax interest and penalties, we've certainly looked at that in some areas and are looking at it in others. Expedited permitting, this committee looked at licensure and permitting and would continue to look at that. Licensure recognition, again, would reemphasize that being mentioned. A sales tax holiday. We talked about a bridge loan program. I think that is similar to what the link deposit program is. A regulatory review. I know we have some pretty tight regulatory review laws in Kansas that we passed a couple of years ago, so we'd encourage the state to continue to look at those regulations that prevent the swift reopening of small businesses and creation of new ones. One thing that I think that the state doesn't allow, here in Kansas and all of our neighboring states do, and those that serve on the tax committee may have heard me urge this before, and I understand that we're in a fiscal crisis moving forward, but it doesn't mean that we can't consider these items, and that is our surrounding states allow particularly small business owners to retain a portion of the sales tax they collect and remit to the state. There is a cost to doing that, but certainly I think the cost now is all the more important for us to be able to retain small business owners to retain a portion of that. Again, moving forward, I mentioned some things on liability and tort reform, as I referenced before, and then some general health practices that we would encourage small business owners to engage. And I think, as Mr. Schneider pointed out, it's incumbent upon small business retailers and restaurants to provide the kind of confidence to the consumers that they can come in and know that they'll have a clean, safe environment. Our owners are being very entrepreneurial, forward-thinking. They want to get out and start serving customers again. So they're doing all they can to respond to that concern. So with that, Mr. Chair, I really, again, appreciate the opportunity to share some brief comments and maybe some ideas to think about moving forward, and would be happy to stand for questions.
Okay, great. Thank you. As I'd ask you the same questions I did, Scott, as businesses are starting to open throughout Kansas, are you seeing an unusually slow recovery? Are people still afraid to come back? And if they had better data, do you suppose that would help?
I think absolutely. Ultimately, I believe a vaccine will give the full slate of consumers the confidence to get back in. But in the interim, we know that's going to take some time. I think some data that the department, both at the federal and the KDHE, can collect and disseminate our experience here in Kansas is critical to give consumers confidence to get back in. And to your point, yes, it has been slow, and in some cases, counties like Johnson and Douglas have continued restrictions on certain businesses that others aren't. So they're certainly slower than other counties. But have a small business member, Corey Peterson of Lindsborg and Helms Lloyd. He's a retailer. A lot of his business is online, but this is the time of year when folks are traveling to Kansas through Kansas, and they stop in Lindsborg, which is a little tourist hotbed in the middle of Kansas. And he was able to open up here in phase 1, and was proud to. He sent a picture of his first sales tax collection, and it was small, but it was certainly something to be optimistic and upbeat about. At least he was happy to see it. But the numbers are still slow. People are not traveling as much. This is the time of year when people are graduating and hitting the roads and visiting towns and traveling across for summer vacations. And that has virtually been curbed. So that's going to be a slow tick. So the more confidence we can give through data and statistics will be important.
Okay, and let's see. I'm not seeing any further questions. How's this affecting you? Representative Williams talked earlier about the importance of eating out and getting out. Have you eaten out lately or gone out and done things?
Yes, actually, the Topeka, Shawnee County allows for restaurants to be open. So I had the opportunity to go out recently when I was in Topeka for business. So yeah, it was good to be able to get out and eat.
All right. Any further questions for Mr. Murray? Seeing none. Well, committee, that's all I have for today. I think I lost you guys. Hold on. What I'm going to,
Chairman, you're still on.
I'm still here. All right. I just lost visual on my computer, so I don't know. Anyway, I guess I'm still here, but my plan is to expedite the minutes on these last two meetings to try to get as much detail as possible into those minutes, and then get those out to you this weekend so that you can review them. And then I'll try to put forward some sort of a report to circulate as far as kind of the things that we discussed Tuesday and today. Let's see here. And I guess with that, we'll just go ahead and adjourn for the day, and you'll be hearing from me soon.